Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I'm your host, Kendrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program coordinator for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years of the classroom. Today's topic is what is really required for certification here in Texas, and we have a guest in the studio with us today. Please welcome Taylor Donias, who is the Certification Officer for the Office of Educator Preparation Programs and Certification here at Texas A&M University. It's a mouthful. Thank you for joining me today.
Howdy. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, we can get right into it. So, like I said in the intro, the topic here is just certification requirements here in Texas and how A&M is kind of meeting those requirements. So, first question here, can you explain what are the specific requirements for obtaining a secondary teacher certification in Texas?
Yes. So the requirements to receive a certification in a secondary area look no different from anyone receiving a certification in a primary content area like EC through 6. And so typically certification areas range either EC through 12, EC through 6, EC through 3, the third grade. EC, by the way, being early childhood. And then you have your 7th through 12th grade certification areas. And so receiving the certification looks the same in terms of requirements, where all students typically go through early field hours, and the state has it doing 50, whereas A&M typically most of our students leave the early field with 180 hours. And then you move into clinical teaching, which previously in old 228, which is the Texas Administrative Code, it was 70 days. However, that requirement's moved to 490 hours. And our students typically leave clinical teaching with 560 hours. So our students are very well prepared in the classrooms. And then all of our students, of course, have to take and pass their content areas before they go into clinical teaching. And then during that time, they will complete their PPR, which is their Professional Pedagogy and Responsibilities exam that every student will take to receive their standard initial certification.
Awesome. So these requirements, who sets them here in Texas? We all hear about TEA, but there's another entity, SBEC, right? And they're involved with educator certification?
So there's 2 or 3 entities really that are responsible for the administrative code. First, you have the Texas Education Agency, TEA. And then you have the SBEC, which is the State Board of Educators. And then you have the SBOE. SBOE is the State Board of Educators. SBEC is the State Board of Education Certification. And so you have those 3 entities, that are really responsible for dictating the code.
So you mentioned that there's a certain number of classroom observation hours that students have to have in order to get certified. What other topics do they need to get in their certification programs?
So one of the requirements is that students receive instruction in a certain amount of areas like dyslexia training, youth suicide awareness, substance abuse awareness. Those are the type trainings that typically that every teacher actually goes through every single year before the beginning of the school year. It's part of their early professional development. And so kind of to mirror that experience, students are required to receive a certain amount of hours of instruction in those content areas. So they go through certain courses to get prepared, like in special education, bilingual learners, and on top of those courses, students go through a TEA learning training that TEA develops. And so it mirrors the exact same trainings that they would go through as a teacher. So on top of the coursework, they have the additional mandated trainings that they complete for certification.
Yeah, so those TEA trainings that our students go through the Aggie Educator Portal, that's our method of doing it, I call those compliance trainings. I don't know what your districts used to call them, but yeah, I think at one point I ended up having 17 that I had to do at the beginning of the school year, from dating violence to bloodborne pathogens and all of that. So yeah, we're just getting all of our students ready for the monotony that is the compliance trainings at the beginning of the school year. So you also said special populations, right? Special education. So we have, of course, in our secondary education minor, the INST 210, right, on special populations. So stuff like that meets those requirements for the state of Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, specific courses. We have that multicultural one. We have the reading course that every student has to take. So, all that is meeting the specific requirements for the state of Texas. That's how A&M is doing it. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. I'll add to that.
Yep.
One of the bigger pushes of recent years is students' instruction in digital literacy. As we all know that artificial intelligence is up and coming, and that the state is recognizing this, and it's a growing area, so that they are adding in that students receive more specific instruction on things like that. And because as we know from COVID, that a lot of classrooms move online. So not only do teachers teach in person, but they have to develop content that can be accessed online through a different learning management system. The state wants students to receive adequate instruction on that so they can provide that.
That's probably a really big benefit. I know both of us were in the classroom during COVID, and it was not fun. We certainly had to pivot real quick and turn everything to virtual.
Yes, and one day you're in a classroom developing, in-person material, and then the next year said everything needs to be digital. And so the expectation to go fully digital was a rough overcoming, but, certainly made it work. But within the next upcoming year, the expectation was that you have a in-person class as well as a online class. So you almost had twice the work just so you can offer both areas. But thankfully, it kind of merged to a more hybrid style learning.
Well, it's good that it's becoming a requirement, because it's definitely needed for teacher candidates to be able to be, able to make that adjustment as needed, or provide that sort of resource for students in their own classroom. So that's good. Now, you mentioned 228, right? So we're talking about Chapter 228 of the TAC, Texas Administration Code. That's recently changed, right? I mean, so how often do these things sort of go through revision?
The cadence of when they get revised is typically every 2 years. The code gets reviewed and ensures that it's still applicable to today's standards. Or sometimes the code can change in need depending on feedback from stakeholder groups that they target. Some of the biggest changes are coming up with the state's big push towards residency. And so a lot of the language in the code was updated to ensure that it flowed. And so they also improved the readability of some of the areas, and they reorganized it so that it had a better flow.
I guess it's no different than, the state standards, the TEKS, going up for revision every so often, just to make sure they're still relevant to what's going on right now. So going back to the classroom observations that was required for certification, by my math, and you already brought it up, we're kind of going a little bit above what we need to for state requirements, right? I mean, we have our field observation courses where they spend half days or maybe full days in the classroom and getting all these hours. Why do you think it's a priority to have so much time in the classroom? As a former educator, I'm asking you, what is the benefit of getting our students in the classroom for so many classroom observation hours?
Exposure. They need to see more, experience more, respond more to situations that come up in the class, because there's only so much you can say and prepare a student inside of a classroom, but then actually taking that content and that knowledge to apply it to real life situations is an experience that you can't get anywhere other than the classroom. And so a lot of times you'll hear some of the guidance for taking the PPR, for example, is perfect world, perfect situation, perfect answer. When you read those questions and you think about it, some of those answers you would not pick because it's not really applicable to that situation, because not everything is going to be a perfect world, perfect situation answer. And so having students experience more of that will make them a more well-rounded educator that can meet the needs of students.
I definitely understand the difference between what do we say, theory and reality. We understand what it should be like, what we hope it would be like. Certainly there's a lot of areas of the state that are not perfect world scenarios. So, I mean, since you brought up testing, so we know that teacher candidates have to show their knowledge through certification exams. So there's a content exam, there's a pedagogy exam. Can you describe in general what these sort of look like and why this is a requirement for certification?
It's a good question. So the content exams are just the way of showing to the state that the candidate is knowledgeable in the area that they're going to be teaching. And then you have the pedagogy exam, which is kind of standardized practices of best teaching methods that everyone needs to know. Some of the exams incorporate the how to teach the pedagogy into it. And those typically we're going to be more of your reading and writing content exams, whereas math is going to have and science will have a little bit less of that methodology in there, but it's still a little bit part of the exams. And so it's just our way of showing that they are well prepared. And so a passing score for any content test or pedagogy is 240 out of 300. And typically our students range in from the 270s upwards to the 290s as far as their performance on their exams.
We certainly have a high pass rate here at A&M.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell the students, you're going to pass the test, but I don't want to put the pressure on the student, right? I don't want to overly burden them, like, I got to pass it on the first try.
Yeah.
No, our students just pass tests because they're in the field, right? So they're getting pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
They're going through the courses that we have in our secondary education minor, so they're getting the theory. They are majoring in their content area, right? So that's what our secondary population is doing. So they're knowledgeable in their content. So I mean, they just are, like you said, a well-rounded sort of pre-service educator here, and they're prepared to pass those exams.
Mm-hmm.
I get the necessity of showing the state of Texas that you know what you're doing, right? Because we want highly qualified educators in the classroom. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this podcast can probably think about a teacher who maybe wasn't so qualified to be in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another thing to always consider is, as former educators, we always know that test results aren't always the big picture of a person. It doesn't necessarily, it's just that's what they know at that time, but then how they actually take that content and apply it, it varies. And we see that with our students. I can think of immediately 5 students off the top of my head that grade-wise, we're not the best. However, performance in other areas and things that they wanted to pursue exceeded beyond my imagination of what they could do. And so a lot of times, scores don't necessarily dictate the quality of a person.
Yeah, I totally understand. Especially with teachers, right? I feel like teachers get a bad rap in terms of you have to be perfect day one, right? Or you're expected to be perfect day one, when in reality, a teacher with 5 years of experience is going to be way better than a teacher that's 1 year.
Yeah.
But I guess there has to be some sort of threshold that we want to make sure that you're at least meeting these before you get into the classroom. But yeah, so experience is certainly the best teacher when it comes to the growth of an educator. It's interesting, though, that when we attend education career fairs and we talk to districts who are coming to recruit Aggie teachers, they say they always value Aggie educators. So what do you think it is about our teacher candidates that make them so valuable to schools across Texas?
Our candidates are held to a higher standard than other programs, I would say. A lot of our students kind of reflect the values here at A&M. And so they take those core values and they not only demonstrate them, but they, every day that they're there, are constantly showing respect, integrity, loyalty. And they're also in constant communication with their cooperating teacher, with the principal. They advocate their needs whenever they arise, and they know how to do it in a way that in the best interest of the student and the best interest of the staff. And so they're really good at communicating. Our students are actually observed more than what is typically required. And so the students are also getting constant feedback from professionals in the field about how they're teaching, how they're performing in other areas. And so the students get feedback based on those observations. And so it's a lot of, constant communication back and forth on what they're doing, how they're doing it. Maybe try this, try that, because as we all know, not every teaching style is going to be the best fit for every single class period. Your teaching style might change from your first period to your third period. Every group of students is going to throw a different set of problems at you, if you will, and you have to understand how to respond to that situation. So a lot of our students going into the field can anticipate a lot of potential issues that can arise. And so it's because of all that feedback and all of that constant iterative feedback, like correction and working on things, it's what makes our students really strong candidates.
I would totally agree with that. I think the best thing that I did was in the classroom to make myself a better teacher was to go through this coaching cycle with one of my department heads, recorded myself teaching. She offered feedback. We made some adjustments or talked about some adjustments I could make, and then go into the classroom and change that. So it sounds like our teacher candidates are almost getting into that process early by having that constant feedback and retrospective thinking about their own education, their own teaching style, and learning how to adapt to it. So that's great. I would offer from the content side, right? I mean, so strong pedagogy is what I'm hearing from you. They're getting a degree in their content area. So, you have a math teacher who actually has a math degree. You have a physics teacher who has maybe a physics degree, maybe a chemistry degree, who knows?
Yeah.
But we have students who are content strong, getting up in front of their classrooms and able to teach the content. So not only do they know the best ways to teach the content, but they know the deeper meaning of the content that they're teaching too. So I think that's what I hear from districts as well, is that they communicate, they know their content, they know how to teach. They are just great additions to the campus wherever they go. So
yeah. On top of that, typically when school districts are looking at candidates, they kind of look at what route were they prepared in. Were they traditionally prepared? Were they alternatively prepared? Were they prepared in a post-bac setting where they're getting their master's degree? So they look at that, and we know that candidates prepared in a traditional educational prep program stay in the field longer. And not only that, is they're typically stronger in their content areas because, like you mentioned, a lot of them, like the area that they're teaching was their degree. And so they've received a lot of instruction in that area. And so kind of going back to a previous question about like content exams and why the state has them, it's just to show a bare minimum understanding of that area that they're going to teach in. And so as long as they can pass that they've demonstrated to the state at least that they're knowledgeable enough to complete this exam. But kind of going again back to another thing I said is just, scores don't always mean everything in terms of quality of a candidate. So there's a lot of things, because they could be an amazing biologist. Will that make them the best biology teacher? We'll have to see how they, in practice.
Yeah, there's a ton of college professors up here that probably could benefit from a pedagogy class or two.
Just a few, maybe a couple PDs here or there, sprinkle them on. Yes, that's why districts value our students so much more. It's just the way that we prepare them, the amount of exposure that they receive, it just makes them very strong, well-rounded candidates.
Yeah, you brought up alternative certification programs as, in a different method of teaching. I'll put you on the spot here and say what sort of state requirements are put on them. Do they have similar requirements for classroom observations, or are they, I don't know, I guess more lax is a question I'm asking.
So I'm not going to speak too much on alternative. I'm actually alternatively prepared myself. That's how I received my certification. The requirements are the same. So whether you're traditionally prepared or alternatively, the requirements for certification, they all are the same in terms of what the state requires. The teaching content area that you get, that you can provide initially on your initial certification, it depends on what your degree was in. So one of the requirements for certification across the board is that everyone has to have a bachelor's degree. And so when you're going alternatively, that's what they review is your SCH, your semester credit hours, and then they kind of total up what areas that you meet that requirement for. So for example, I had about 20 hours of business credits since my minor was in business. And so one of the areas that they offered to me were a business content area. The other areas, my main degree was actually in kinesiology. So they offered physical education, health. Those are the ones that I can kind of choose from based off of my transcript hours that I could provide content in. Mm-hmm. So when you're admitted in, you can test typically right away after a few content pedagogy courses. So you can take your content exam, and then you would take your PPR during your internship. Because if you're alternatively prepared, typically you can do clinical teaching. It's unpaid. So most opt to go through the internship route, which is paid through by the district. Mm-hmm. So you're essentially a teacher of record. However, you're still getting observations from your program. And so that's still the same as if you were traditionally prepared.
I agree. One of my best teaching buddies that I taught with many years ago was alternatively certified. I helped her learn the physics content because she didn't have the physics background, but I helped her learn the physics so she could teach it. And I think last year she won Teacher of the Year for her district. So, I mean, like she was alternatively certified, but still became a fantastic teacher. So I think no matter what pathway you go through, if you're interested in being a good teacher, right, then you're going to succeed in the classroom. And I think most of our students are interested in being great teachers. Coming back to the Aggie core values, the preparation, like whatever you want to point to. But I think our students just have a better outlook as to what it means to be a teacher. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think one last question I have for you is just, if listeners want to learn more about maybe their next steps in a teacher certification program, where could they go to get more information?
I would say, first of all, reach out on our website, certification.tamu.edu. Some of our contact information is there. Reach out to us with any of your questions, concerns, thoughts, and we'll be able to provide you the best guidance. But a lot of other information, like I said, is available on our website.
That is all the time that we have today. Thank you, Taylor, for being a guest today. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks. To make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.